Hello, and welcome to another episode of David's Dice. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond, and tonight I welcome back Rachel, who is going to talk about the Mental Health Act, particularly looking at the Mental Health Act in the context of autistic people. It's quite an important piece of legislation. We will be talking about some of the proposed changes to the Mental Health Act, but the disclaimer on that is that everything is still under review at the moment. So anything we talk about in reference to changes itself, depending on the outcome of review and that process. So I will introduce myself, give an audio description. So I'm David Gray Hammond. I'm a white Mediterranean male in his mid-30s. I have a shaved head, a beard, a lip ring, thick rimmed glasses, and an ear tunnel. I'm wearing a tie-dye black and white vest, and I'm sat next to the bookcase that hasn't fallen on me since the last. Doing all right there. Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Rachel Gavin. I'm an independent social worker. I'm in my 40s, so short black hair. At the moment, I've got a screensaver in the back, which is made up of white bricks, and I've a white t-shirt on. And I look forward to speaking to everyone this evening.
Thank you very much. And remember, you can supply purchasing a subscription on the Substack website, which is davidsdivergentdiscussions.co.uk. And please do post your questions in the comments if you have any, and we will endeavour to answer them to the best of our ability. So, the Mental Health Act.
Yeah.
It's a big piece of legislation. It's quite complicated. Is there a Cliff Notes version of if someone, just asked you to explain the Mental Health Act, what would you feel would be the most sort of pertinent pieces from that act that affect people the most in their everyday sort of lives with regards to mental health?
Oh, it's a huge piece of legislation. So to narrow that down, the Mental Health Act, I would say, acts is meant to act as a safeguard, in a sense, for people regarding mental health needs. So what so an AMP is a social worker, approved mental health professional, although there can be other professionals who can apply to be an AMP for short. And what the mental health, so they use the Mental Health Act, can be used to detain, so to assess someone's mental health needs, and to provide treatment. I mean, that's a very, very short summarized version. So the Mental Health Act came into place really in 1983. So at the moment they're looking at a mental health bill, but that's still in draft. So what that's looking to do is basically modernize the Mental Health Act. So what that's doing is proposing changes to the grounds on which someone could be detained for assessment and treatment. But that, as I say, has been going through a draft process for quite some time. It was supposed to be in place to modernise the Mental Health Act by now, but that hasn't happened yet. So I think we're still quite. I'm not expecting any modernisation to the Mental Health Act to become a law really until at least 2025. But there's variations in that. People are saying 2024, but given what's got to be done, I'm not expecting that to be the case.
And we've been asked, does the Mental Health Act apply to children's mental health and CAMS as well, or only adult mental health?
Children as well.
Children as well. There we
Yeah.
go. So it's probably a good idea to talk about some of the sections that come up most commonly for people being detained. People historically have been detained at quite a high rate. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I know that the last figure I saw, there was sort of like 1,000 autistic people in the country being held under the Mental Health Act. So you know, when we think about those parts that are used to detain, I think probably the most common ones that come about are Section 136 and Section 135 of the Mental Health Act. Would you be okay to give a brief description of what those sections do?
Yes, yeah. So in terms of, it really depends on the assessment, and what the issue is in terms of whether what an AMP is assessing under. While it's in my mind, if to have a more detailed explanation, and I quite like this. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, David, the masked AMP.
Okay, no, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, just while it was in my mind, I would say to just so it's he simplifies it. So he's an approved mental health professional, very well known in the mental health world when it comes to the Mental Health Act. And I like the way he simplifies everything because it's huge, the Mental Health Act. So there's a lot of different powers really. So there's police have powers to enter your home if need be under Section 135 warrant. 136 is a place of safety. See, if I start to go through all these, I'm concerned I'm going to probably scare the life out of people because there's so many. Um, there's an awful lot of different sections. But the main one is where there's assessment. You can also be, if an AMP warrants someone needs to be detained, there would be a doctor involved in that process, two doctors usually involved in that process as well. Someone can be detained under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, so that can be up to 28 days. Then you've got Section 3 of the Mental Health Act, which is up to 6 months under Section 3 of mental health with further renewals if required. So it's a massive, massive area. So highly recommend looking at the masked AMP as and when needed. And Mind also have a really good section on their website as well, which simplifies that. So that might help as a reference as well for that. So basically, Mental Health Act comes in is essentially can be treated against your will if the need is there to warrant that. I think one of the major issues that we find and have done for quite some time, again, I think David and Tanya talk about competency, professional competency, an awful lot. And we are and have seen such high levels of people being detained, whether they are autistic, also people that have a learning disability, and really, really high numbers. And that's across England and Wales. As you were talking, David, I was actually looking for recent figures, but it doesn't seem to be any at the moment, but we do know it's high.
Yeah, and yeah, trying to find recent figures, I found a bit of a challenge. I think the most recent figures I've seen were 2021,
Yeah,
said how many people were held in the UK. I consider the size of a country, it was like 1,100 and something, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually that's
no,
quite a lot when you consider the number of people detained under the Mental Health Act. But the question that comes to my mind that I think people would probably like to know is, um, under the Mental Health Act, is autism classed as a mental health problem currently?
yes.
So
Mm.
a person can be detained for being autistic.
Well, this is where there are, I mean, it can depend on the AMP, it can depend on the service, but a lot of people ask me this question. What it actually means. So an AMP shouldn't, it could have happened, but I would hope not, shouldn't detain someone purely on the basis that they're autistic, because what the AMP is looking for, and there's certainly been the case with good AMPs I've worked with in Wales, is that they're looking at potential really high risks to the person, or someone else, rather than that person being autistic. But it doesn't state that precisely in the Mental Health Act. So it could be perceived by a professional. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So again, it comes down to this professional competence. This
Yeah.
it,
And I
it
always
comes
bring this in, and Yeah, I always bring this in because I've been lucky over the years where I've worked with an absolutely fantastic approved mental health professionals team. They're based in Wales, who would not in a million years detain someone where there's a major concern purely on any basis that that person is autistic. There would have to be some serious concerns about really, really high threshold risk to that person for major concerns to themselves and to other people. And then while I'm on that subject, it's important that people then also are aware of the nearest relative role as well, because it looks like there may be some changes to that when the bill comes in.
And can you explain the nearest relative rule just as it stands currently?
Yeah, yeah. So the nearest relative is normally the person, it comes with age as well, so it's normally the person closest. That could be someone's parent. It could be, but that was normally the case. The older parent is normally the nearest relative, but it depends again on the situation. But the AMP will always look to ensure that that nearest relative, it could be a son, it could be a daughter, father, mother. So under Section 29 of the Mental Health Act, the patient, any relative person who lives with the patient at the time, can apply to replace the nearest relative as well. So the nearest relative at the moment, as it stands, has a lot of is a safeguard, I'd say, in itself for the person in connection with the person being detained, their care and their treatment. So the nearest relative can raise concerns.
Yeah,
If
certainly when I did my independent advocacy course, one of the things you tend to look to do is to have the nearest relative, if they are looking to have the person released from a section, to have the nearest relative write to the hospital manager to request the release from section. And obviously then they have to justify why they won't do that if they're not going to.
yeah,
Um,
it's a big responsibility, but an absolute must because it is a safeguard for
yeah,
the person. And at any time during the detention of the person, that nearest relative can raise a concern with the treating team then.
yeah. And in terms of those safeguards, are there any other safeguards that are important to be aware of for people who may be on this side of the Mental Health Act?
I think at the moment, the nearest relative probably has the most safeguards in terms of protecting against any concerns of any care and treatment that that person is having essentially from the health board. Ultimately, I keep referring back to it, I know, but it's about, I guess, understanding as well the what that person you've got to kind of rely on professionals to really understand what that person's needs are as well, and that can involve the environment that person may be residing in under the Mental Health Act. We talk about this a lot. If someone is detained in the wrong environment, then it can create major issues and escalate things as well. And so, in terms of a safeguard, I would be quite aware of that and making sure that needs are thoroughly, as the nearest relative, needs are thoroughly understood in terms of that person,
Yeah,
because you could potentially have a longer stay if those needs aren't being met, if that makes sense.
yeah. And of course, there is also the independent mental health advocate, which is an important right for people who are detained under the Mental Health Act.
Yeah,
And, I would recommend people have contact with an advocate, even if they're not trying to be released from a section. I believe that having an advocate in place is an important thing to have when
yeah,
you are in that system. It can be a very confusing system. You're probably not in the best place anyway if you're in that system.
yeah,
Someone who is trained the rights and explain them to you is really, really important.
Would it help for me to explain what rights the nearest relative has as well?
Yes, definitely.
So again, it depends on the situation, but the nearest relative could apply to section a person where they've got concerns or place that person under guardianship. They can object to a person being sectioned or placed under guardianship. They can apply for discharge the person if they've been sectioned. So how they do that is that they apply to the mental health tribunal. Then usually, say it was a parent who was the nearest relative of a person, they were really concerned about the care and treatment, about the section as well. They can then apply to the mental health tribunal, as I said, and they can also ask for an independent advocate to give the person support as well. So the nearest relative can be consulted and given information about the person if that person's sectioned. I could also, as it stands, appoint someone else to be the person's nearest relative as well.
Okay. And one to raise here, because it's some across being asked before. How does the Mental Capacity Act into play here with the Mental Health Act? Because they're two separate pieces of the legislation. And I think sometimes people get confused that if they're being detained under the Mental Health Act, that means they lack capacity. But that's not really always the case, is it?
No, I think so. Yeah, they're completely different pieces of legislation. So, where I'd say the Mental Capacity Act comes in, so if a person has been assessed and you'd have to be quite unwell to be assessed under the Mental Health Act and then be detained. It could be argued at that point. I mean, that person is so unwell that at this very point in time, they're not able to make that decision. You'd expect perhaps that might be the case if someone is quite unwell. However, when someone is, if they're having the needs are being met and the care and treatment is meeting that person's needs, capacity can, in terms of capacity around making decisions around your treatment. So, say it was me who I'm detained. I go into the wherever it is that I'm detained to, I might be very unwell and I can't make a decision at that point in terms of my care and treatment. So I would be admitted. But then as my care and treatment progresses and I'm starting to feel better, then capacity around making decisions around care and treatment can quite easily change as that person is feeling better. So they're two separate pieces of legislation, but they will come into that. So if as the nearest relative, you're further into the treatment or you feel the person's decision making has changed around care and treatment and your doubts around that person's ability to make decisions around care and treatment has changed, and those doubts to you are looking like, well, actually now I think now person A is in a much better position. It may be that, okay, now we need to review that person's capacity and decision making around care and treatment as well, and they should very much be the voice within that care and treatment process then. So yeah.
But assessment under the Mental Health Act is under the jurisdiction of the Mental Health Tribunal, whereas the Mental Capacity Act is under the Court of Protection.
The Mental Capacity Act applies everywhere in a sense. If a person is deemed not to have capacity in a certain area, then it's an obligation of all professionals to work in that person's best interests. So that sits anywhere. So that sits out in the court of protection, yes, but not just the court of protection.
Okay.
It sits within all services. That would be the expectation. But we need to adhere to the code of practice under the Mental Capacity Act as well. And one of those first pieces of the code of practice is to assume capacity around a particular decision. So capacity is not like generic, that only precise decisions. You could have capacity in one area of decision making, but not another. But one of the first points of the code of practice with the Mental Capacity Act is to assume capacity unless there are doubts around a particular decision that person might be making. If there are doubts, then yes, we could usually look at assessing that person's capacity in that particular area. But they're two different pieces of legislation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted to come back to this idea to enforce treatment where it may not be something that the person wants, because there are certain kinds of treatment that can't be enforced without sort of extra steps, electroconvulsive therapy, and I wondered if you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So, break that down for me, David.
So, for example, my understanding is that treatment such as electroconvulsive therapy, it's not a treatment that can be enforced without that there's extra safeguards. I believe there has to be sort of extra assessment before someone can be forced to have a treatment such as electroconvulsive therapy.
Yeah, and that's a really good example of where the Mental Capacity Act might come in, because in a case where there is something like that to be added to the care and treatment side of things, or something, quite unique in a sense, or any part of the treatment really, can be looked at through the best interest process. So if that person is still sort of, if there's still concern that person doesn't have capacity to make a particular decision about some therapy or treatment like that, then it can go to the best interest process as well. And then that would involve the nearest relative, the treating team, advocate. So the nearest relative would be right to raise concerns about something like that they might know is not, not what the person wants, or yeah. So then, yeah, the mental capacity I can definitely come into that as well. But you'd expect any form of treatment with health to automatically think about the best interest process. But what I must say is that the Mental Capacity Act only applies to age 16 and above.
Mm.
So under that, you're bringing in parental responsibility, but it should still work in the same way. But just so people know that it doesn't apply to 16 and to under 16.
Okay, and so I guess I have a question here. I'd say it's a hypothetical situation, but I've actually been through it myself. But I suspect, well, I know that there are other people who have been through this situation within the realms of inpatient treatment. And I'm interested for your opinion on what a person should do in this situation. So
Okay.
my own experience was entering a hospital as a voluntary patient, but
Right.
then being told if I try and discharge myself, I will be sectioned, which meant that essentially I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I didn't know if I tried to discharge myself early if I would be sectioned. What's a person's rights there when they're being if when they've gone in voluntarily, but they're then being told if they discharge themselves they'll be sectioned?
Well, if they're that concerned that you'd meet the threshold to be detained, you'd that's quite a tricky one, isn't it?
Mm.
It depends on the concern that they have at the time, although yeah, they obviously were concerned enough that they did feel that treatment was required. But again, I think the best thing to do in that situation was to make sure, if this was you or anyone else, to make sure that you have an independent advocate within that support, really. But it's something that you could apply to the mental health tribunal around to get some advice that way. But yeah, you'd think that's quite. I mean, yeah, that's quite a tricky situation, isn't it?
Because from my own
Um,
perspective, and I know it comes with my own personal experience here, it
hmm,
almost seems like an abuse of the Mental Health Act. It's being used in a coercive way.
yeah. Well, it
It,
is coercive. It will. Yeah, it does feel like that. But I mean, it's something. It's a really interesting example, actually, because I bet that's not unusual. Um, because if you're, I mean, it's different if you're voluntary. as well in terms of what they can do from there. So yeah, that would be a good one to discuss if with amps that I work with, just to see in their situation in terms of an amp's perspective what they might consider appropriate there, because that probably isn't something that's unusual, is it?
No. I mean, like I said, it happened to me, and I've worked with people who it's happened to as well. And I find it kind of a little bit shocking, really, because looking back on my own experience, that isn't conducive to how you're going, well, I don't know what my rights are here because I'm not under leave. I will be under section. Would I be better being sectioned and then having the rights that come with that?
Probably,
I think
if
it's
I'm if
something that.
I'm
Sorry.
if I'm if I'm brutally honest, you probably, I mean, there are still rights. There are still rights, but yeah, it's an interesting example, and I think I will discuss that with an amp, because I probably, yeah, as you say, it probably isn't an unusual situation to be in, but there are still rights. But yeah,
Yeah.
are those rights stronger being detained under the Mental Health Act? But then if you're requesting to leave, I mean, at that time, again, we're going back to capacity again. If someone is requesting to leave a hospital and there are concerns about the person's capacity regarding that, and it could be treatment, then you could be into the deprivation of liberty safeguards
Hmm.
re, sort of remit then, because you can't. Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, that
Yeah.
one, isn't it?
Although, of course, deprivation of liberty safeguards is another area that's going through change at the moment, isn't it? With the bringing in of liberty protection safeguards.
Yeah, and the big massive change is that that's going to the LPS, the Liberty Protection Safeguards, going to apply to 16-year-olds as well now,
Yeah,
which
so
hasn't been the case.
it seems to me that a lot of this legislation is going through change at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so basically, what you're telling me, David, that you would have been an informal
Yeah,
inpatient technically.
yeah.
You should be able to come and go from the ward. So any arrangements relating to time off the ward would usually need to be discussed with your nursing team or the consultant. So they would then need to consider the current risks. And then you need to discuss with them what you're going to do, when you're planning to return, etc. But if you were under the Mental Health Act, then application would be made for Section 17 leave. So I'm inclined to say that probably the rights are better under the being detained under the Mental Health Act. But then why would you want to be if you don't need to be? And you
Yeah,
wouldn't meet that
yeah.
either.
But
So you can actually withdraw consent involuntary in informal
yeah,
to any part of your proposed treatment. Being informal inpatient, any part of your proposed treatment, you could withdraw any part of that treatment plan.
I'm really glad you said that because one of the things that I try to make clear to a lot of people is that if you are an informal patient, it is entirely dependent on your consent,
Yeah.
and they can't just violate your consent on a
Yeah,
whim.
and that is, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm getting a little bit annoyed with it. Because I'm thinking about myself, thinking, "Oh, what if I was in that position?" When actually, I think you hit the nail on the head where you said that's an abuse of the Mental Health Act.
Yeah, but
Because you've got, sorry, go on.
I've come up against this a few times now, and it's a question of, you don't want to, you never want to advise a person to allow themselves to be sectioned, but actually perhaps they have stronger rights.
Well, that's what I feel. I'm kind of being careful in what I say, but I'll just say it as it is, in that you wouldn't want to advise anyone, I mean, they wouldn't be detained under the Mental Health Act if they didn't meet the criteria anyway. Well, you would hope that wouldn't be the
Yeah,
case. But at the same time, if you're informal, voluntary basis, then the right to discharge yourself from hospital from any time. So if you wish to discharge yourself from the hospital, it could be the consultant, nursing staff. They would ask you to wait to see a doctor before you leave, but technically you could do.
And I think this brings us back again to this regularly occurring theme of professional competency, which is,
Yeah.
you know, legislation is only as good as the professionals carrying it out.
Yeah. 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 I mean, in that situation, if the care team then, we'll just call them the care team wherever you are, don't believe or didn't believe that discharge from hospital at that point was in your best interest, or if they had concerns about your safety, if you left the hospital, yes, they can then arrange for you to be assessed under the Mental Health Act, but you've got to have, I mean, that's a high threshold. Or if they consider that you no longer have capacity to consent to an informal admission, it might be at that point they'd request a deprivation of liberty.
Hmm. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there, but
Yeah,
for
it's
people
huge.
who have been under section, obviously they have certain entitlements once they leave the hospital, such as Section 117 aftercare.
Yes.
Could you give a sort of brief explanation of what Section 117 aftercare means?
Yeah, so it's Section 117 is exactly that. It's aftercare in the community. So that will be funded by health. So that would be looking at care and support planning that you will need in the community for support to essentially prevent you having to go back into hospital, or try and prevent that person being detained again. Um Unfortunately, again, you've got to have the right people looking at that in terms of the support you might need in the community, because sometimes, unless you really fight for an appropriate care and support plan in the community, you may be in a position where it's not very, it's not very helpful, and it may not be meeting your needs in the community, and then you risk then potentially needing to go back into hospital, and of course that's not what you want.
Yeah, and I can almost hear the people listening to this going, "Well, there's no support for autistic adults anyway." Um, but
True.
there is that there are things you can do to create a more robust support plan. I know certainly, um, in my own experience, I have written. Uh, I'm losing my words. Advanced, ad, losing the words. Yeah,
Yeah,
proper alien.
advanced decisions.
Yeah, advanced decision.
Yeah.
Or-
N No, I do that with people a lot. So say I'm coming in to work with and support someone who's had a history perhaps of being detained under the Mental Health Act. One of the first things I do is support that person to make any advanced decisions while they are well about their treatment in the future, if needed, because wishes and feelings prior to becoming unwell are huge, absolutely huge, when that person perhaps has lost capacity around decisions on their care and treatment. I would then go, and it could be years before, I'd go back through their files. Let's find their wishes and feelings in terms of the support and the care and treatment that they needed, because at that very point in time, they could make the decision about treatment. And so then I bring that forward, because I kind of come in an independent mode really in my sort of role now, and that's the sort of thing I'd bring through to a mental health tribunal and make suggestions and recommendations to a mental health tribunal. In 3 years ago, Joe Blogg's wishes and feelings around treatment was ABCDE, and that's a very strong matter for mental health tribunal for care and treatment. So that's a really good one to raise, David, because that's
Yeah,
so important.
yeah, and I remembered the word, and I was going to say advanced directive. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I know
but,
what you mean. I mean, it's very similar.
but
What's important to understand and to know about Section 117 is that it's free. So
yeah,
aftercare, Section 117 is free. So, for example, generically, if you were getting care and support from a local authority, then and just the local authority, then you'd be liable for like fairer charging assessments towards that care. Whereas, you know, if you were coming, if you'd had treatment into Section 3, or under a hospital order, and that's Section 37. I don't want to go through all these sections because it's going to scare people, but following transfer from prison under Section 47 or 48, under a hospital direction under Section 45A, there's tons free. That aftercare then in the community is free. So say a person had an assessment with social services for care and support, and as I said, you know, there's fairer charging to consider as well, but there's limits on the fairer charging, but that wouldn't be related, because if someone was detained in the Mental Health Act, then they automatically, and they needed 117, it's completely free anyway.
Yeah, so there's the thing to understand about the Mental Health Act is it really is a huge piece of legislation. It's really quite complicated.
Yes, well, the book, I have the book, and it's Richard Jones. You may have heard of Richard Jones. He's written the Mental Health Act, and that took me a couple of years to get through, and to, you know, with practice experience as well. I am not an AMP. I just worked a lot with AMPs, and well, I couldn't. I would. It would probably days may not be enough for me to talk about every single part of it. It's huge.
Yeah, and certainly even for people who work within the Mental Health Act regularly, it's big enough that people aren't expected to know the whole thing off the top of their head. You know, even the people who are working with it on a day-to-day basis
Yeah,
refer back to the legislation because
every time. I remember that happened. So say that if an AMP was going out to do an assessment to see whether someone needed to be detained and needed treatment, and I'd go out with them, and we were often looking back through the legislation at certain parts because it's just massive.
absolutely. But obviously, as we've mentioned, you know, that it's currently under review to look for, you know, making a more modern approach to the Mental Health Act.
Yes.
Is there anything that you're concerned about or anything you hope to see in future changes?
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the bill thus far, um, it it's taken away quite a bit of things I was concerned about then under the Mental Health Act. It has more, well, it's paying more attention this time round to autistic people as well, and also people with learning disabilities, because people with learning disabilities also very high numbers of people detained under the Mental Health Act with a learning disability as well. So under the new draft bill, learning disability and autism, from what I can gather so far, would still be classified as mental disorders, but would not be included in the new category of psychiatric disorders. So, as only those with psychiatric disorders can be detained, autistic or people with learning disabilities would not be held unless they had a coexisting psychiatric disorder. So that's what the draft is telling me so far. So the change there, was, so under the Mental Health Act, it was very, very clear that, you know, detention based on, if you read it, looked like just being autistic. But in practice, in day to day, an approved mental health professional would not just look at that anyway. They would look at that risk, which isn't often displayed, I think. I think perhaps the Mental Health Act, being, you know, technically 1983, is a little bit behind in the writing, and, you know, some of it, it's quite a difficult read. So this is what the draft bill is proposing, but as I said, it's still under draft. It will probably be many more drafts until we get to the final point.
I would also add that it's good that, you know, being autistic may not be considered a psychiatric diagnosis. but the co-occurring diagnosis catches a lot of autistic
Of
people
course.
because psychiatric conditions in autistic populations are much higher than in the general population.
Yes, they are. So what my so I fed into the concerns for the draft. Very, very well, pretty much exact what you're saying. Concerns, the same concerns I fed back. But I also, oh, my screen went off then. But I also raised that. So even despite there being the removal of, in terms of the wording of autism and learning disability as grounds for detention, which is how it's worded, I'm concerned, and I stated this as well, may lead to more detentions under different legal powers with fewer safeguards or
Mm.
diversion into the criminal justice system instead. And that would be the opposite of what the change is actually intended to achieve. So that was a concern of mine as well. Additional concerns that I had was that the new bill would mean that people with very, very, I hate this word, complex needs, and that could be lots of different physical health needs as well on top, um, would be given an alternative. Is there a risk of a person being given an alternative mental health diagnosis as well to justify longer term detention? And the draft law still allows someone to be detained for assessment for 28 days. So what I'm saying is I'm still not there yet. I'm still not quite convinced that it's going to change dramatically, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Because one of the major concerns that I have is if we had better, I know this is not realistic either in terms of what's out there, but if we had better support from the community, if we had better provision, we wouldn't need to be. I mean, the levels are so high, and particularly, we don't talk about the levels of adults with learning disability. And not disregarding anyone else. I'm just, the rates are particularly high. And then moving on from hospitals and to be able to source appropriate supported housing, just not there.
Mm.
So, are people being detained longer in a sense because they've got nowhere appropriate to move on to?
I know certainly in my own
What do you think?
experience in the psych ward, I knew of one patient, and she was on the ward and had been for over 2 years
Oh,
because there was nowhere else to send her.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's something I have seen several times.
Just this week alone, I've had 4 referrals for this very, very issue where 4 people have been in hospital, and one, I nearly dropped my coffee, had been in hospital for 10 years. And, so what they're asking me to do is look at provisions are there, assess that person's needs, and I will blink and find someone, some way, I will, because that is just, well, I'm getting goosebumps now as I'm talking about it. I mean, how on earth can you justify someone being detained in an ATU for 10 years?
And we really have to consider institutionalization here because, you know, that it is quite a regimented life on a psych
Very,
ward.
very.
And when you come out of a psych ward after any length of time, I mean, even for me, mine's only been on that stays on the length of months rather than years. Even then, when you come out, trying to adjust to not having this regimented, this is wake up time, this is medication time, this is time to eat, this is time for recreation, this is time for therapy.
Yeah,
Not having that structure can be dysregulating in itself. And I think when you're an autistic person, you've got that dysregulation of going into this regimented routine, then you're released from your section, and you've got change again because you're going back to the real world, which the real world almost stops existing when you're in a psych ward.
Well, it does. Literally, it does. And then,
Yeah,
but even in a psych ward, you've got it's a sensory nightmare, isn't it?
yeah,
I mean, only last week I walked it and they were wondering why a young gentleman was really distressed in the ATU that he was in. And I don't even think I was in there for 2 seconds. I walked through the door and I was like, oh, because being neurodivergent as well, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, I couldn't cope in this environment. Um, just the noise, just even just the simplest of things that you think was, bright lights, busy environment, and I mean, it was too much. Um, so yeah, they're not the best environments either.
yeah.
But you can't really win because, like you say, then it's what happens when you leave then, when you get institutionalized, and just after a few months, you probably find it's really hard to adapt to the community again.
Well, as an autistic ADHD and schizophrenic person myself, I still have a giggle about this because staff did not know what to do.
Yeah.
I disliked the lights. I was having a psychotic episode, so I decided the lights were a part of that. So I
Mhm.
took it upon myself to try and work out how to remove the light fittings from the
Yeah.
ward. I find that quite funny. The staff did not. Um, but it raises that
Typical
question of
autism.
yeah, you've got to think about the environment you're putting people in
Yeah.
because you're going to have a lot of autistic people just by virtue of, as we said,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
more likely to have a psychiatric diagnosis anyway.
Yeah.
So you'd think that on these wards they would consider sensory needs. Really, I think with
They
whoever's
don't.
coming through the door, that
Yeah.
should be the first thing they're thinking about
You'd
is
think
what is
so.
this ward?
But I think it was only recently, I think I might have been talking to Tanya about it because I work and yes, most of the majority of my work is working with neurodivergent children, young people, and adults. But I've got a separate side of my work as well, which is purely mental health. You won't believe how many generic mental health inpatient settings I'm going to, and no one's realized that that person is struggling so much because they're autistic.
Yeah,
And all the needs that this person's I got one in particular in my mind who he's just absolutely amazing. He was talking to me and telling me what he's experiencing and what the issues are, um, why he's finding the environment so challenging. And I made an assumption. I thought, right, okay. So I just said, oh, I'm neurodivergent as well. So and then was talking to him about it, but he didn't realize, and neither did the team. Um, so there's that as well, because I find it very separated, and I'm just I'm just finding lots of people when I go in, um, just really, really, you could probably see me getting quite stressed about it, because it is an issue, and I worry about people and the settings, and it's just not a fit for
I'm
purpose
a,
to be.
I'm a strong believer that if they looked at the sensory environment of the
Oh
setting
yeah,
and made it easier to cope with, they would see a massive reduction in aggressive behavior.
absolutely,
But, you
absolutely.
know, they never do look at these things.
No, but it was like that when me and that gentleman were talking, and he said something that really sort of stayed with me. It's something that's so simple. He just said, "I'm just reacting to the environment," and
Yeah,
that's what he said.
yeah.
And I was like, "That's a perfect, perfect example." Um, and that's what we did. We looked at the environment. We looked at the support. We had to do an awful lot of training around autistic experience and everything, which to most of us, you, David, would just be second nature. But so, I sometimes find I'm pulling teeth.
Yeah. Well, it's been a really good episode, and I think there's a lot for people to learn from this. Certainly, I recommend anyone with an interest, check out the resources that Rachel has mentioned because I think was it the Mask Dam, and there was a
Yeah,
book as well you mentioned.
yeah. There's the Mind are pretty good, and I like the way Mind have simplified everything and the mental health app. So have a look at Mind's website, and then if you Google a mask dam, and he is also on Facebook as well. They're a massive team of amps from all over the world. So whenever you've got a concern about a family member, they're brilliant. If you just put that question in there, the likelihood is they will give you the advice there and then. They're very good, very supportive.
Okay, well, that's some good resources, and glad you mentioned Mind. I actually used to be a consultant for Mind.
Did
Yeah,
you?
that's how I
Yeah,
started out in this line of work. I
yeah.
was a service user consultant for their substance misuse team.
They're absolutely brilliant, but I have got a bit of bias as well because my grandfather was one of the first to set up Mind, and
Oh,
so I think it's in the blood, working in the areas that we do.
yeah,
So absolutely amazing charity, David.
yeah.
I've had really good
I'm
experiences with them.
particularly fond of their local branches that tend to have quite a lot of sway in the commission
Yes,
of services on the local level.
they
'Cause
do.
I know when I was working with Minded, we're involved in making, we help choose service providers and
Yeah.
influence treatment policy and all sorts. So there was a great deal of good work going on there.
So last question, David. Do they have offices in most areas that people can access?
I think they do.
Yeah,
From what I've seen, because quite often when people come to me looking for local advocacy, the first place I check is the Mind website because they tend to be the providers of independent mental health advocacy in any given area. And they may
yeah,
not have a branch in every single town, but they
no,
usually have a branch within like a catchment area. So I
yeah.
think most areas are covered by their advocacy services.
Well, that's good to know because I wasn't sure like how wide they are because they are really good. But in Wales, I don't know if it's the same, and they've actually branched out into supported accommodation as well. I
Yeah,
don't know if they do it in England, but I'm finding their services really good. So yeah, always a good one to check in with if you need advice would be Mind.
yeah. Anyway, it's been a really good episode. I'm gonna hit the end button in a second, but thank you everyone who's tuned in and listened live. I know even more of you will tune in to the recording. I think at the moment I'm on about 1,500 listens per episode on average. So,
That's
I'm really pleased with the reach this podcast has. Um, Thank you to everyone who tunes in and listens. And thank you, Rachel, for coming on and giving such an informative episode this week. Um, I don't in at the moment, so I may be taking a brief lull from some episodes, but that's probably not a bad thing because I've been going pretty hard at them recently. But in the meantime, thank you everyone, and I will catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.